Everybody.
Hello.
A very warm welcome to the second in our series of the Vegan Mesh Up, Touchpoints Making an Impact. My name is Fiona Blades, founder of Mesh Experience, and my co-chair is our Global Managing Director, Dana Di Gregorio. Dana's actually lost her voice today, but while she won't be speaking, her voice will be heard through the chat. So please do interact with her on this. I'm also delighted to have with us again today Professor Hugh Wilson from Warwick Business School and Natasha Polston, our Experience Executive at Mesh. And they're going to be revealing the touch points that are indeed making an impact in a few minutes. We're also extremely lucky to have Anne McCormack from Mondelez, the Consumer Insights Manager behind the recent launch of the Cadburys Plant Bar. And she's going to be telling us the inside story behind this launch. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Please do ask questions in the chat as we go along. And if we don't have time to answer them, we'll get back to you after the webinar. I'd also like to give a little bit of a shout out actually to Snack Primal, who posted on my LinkedIn yesterday, and they said, try our flavored walnuts, order your free sample pack. So anyone that's interested, it's snackprimal.com, and I like the look of the spicy walnuts and the sassy walnuts myself, but check them out if you're interested. Okay, so let's start off. What's been the big news in 2022? Well, no prizes for guessing here. It's been Veganuary. And these are all photos that our participants have been sending in as part of the study. So what have we got as the headlines? Well, more than 629,000 people from 228 countries and territories officially signed up to try vegan for 31 days, making this the biggest Veganuary ever. Aldi saw a 500% increase in plant-based sales during Veganuary. And a Welsh pub that trialled the vegan-only menu during Veganuary found it to be so successful that they're keeping it this way. And importantly, Cadbury's released the Plant Bar. And McDonald's released the McPlant. And we've actually got some quotes that should be coming up on screen in a moment about those two launches, where we were picking up experiences from our participants. So here you can see what people are actually saying as they're coming across these experiences. And the Cadbury's one was obviously picked up in a news article, and there was a lot of advertising around the vegan McPlant burger. It was also the time when Veganuary had their very first cinema ad that was voiced by James Cromwell. And perhaps not surprisingly, we're going to have this as our ad of the month. So Dana, I hope you can actually show us this ad. I'm not sure I can actually hear the sound this time. Which is strange because actually we could hear it when we did the rehearsal 10 minutes ago. There we go. And I think what's quite interesting about that is that actually it picks up on the sustainability, and we're going to be speaking in a moment with Professor Hugh Wilson, and he was actually at COP26. So in a moment, Hugh, it'd be great to just hear a few of your thoughts. But before we go into that, a little bit about the methodology that we're using in order to bring you the insights that we've got today. So we're going to be capturing, or we are capturing, people's experiences in real time. And every single brand encounter that somebody has with vegan or plant-based products, they report to us. So we've recruited our participants through an online panel, and each has completed a short survey, and they tell us their perceptions of vegan and plant-based categories. So for example, we're asking, how interested would you be in purchasing vegan-friendly products in these categories in the next 12 months? So we get a measure of interest. We're also asking things like, please select the words from the list below that you associate with veganism and vegan-friendly products and services. And these are things like healthy, worthy, expensive, ethical, and convenient, and many others. But the reason for mentioning this is that you will start to see some of the data coming through that have these things in them. After that survey, we asked people to tell us whenever they see, hear, or experience anything to do with one of a number of categories that we're interested in. And these include things like food, beverages, grocery retail, clothes, beauty, and quite a few others. Our participants report the category, they report the touch point, how positive it made them feel, how persuasive it was, and how relevant that experience was. And then they describe the experience, and they sent in a photo, of which you saw a few earlier. And they do all of this in their mobile diaries. So we've actually got thousands of experiences to analyze. At the end of each of the weeks that the participant is working, they answer some of the same questions that we've asked at the beginning of their study week. So this means that we can see if their perceptions have actually changed. So maybe they're more interested in purchasing vegan-friendly products in a particular category. And if so, we can start to see which experiences they've had that could have caused this change. And this is the experience maximizer analysis, which we actually developed with Hugh and with Emma McDonald over 10 years ago, that we're going to be using today to unpick exactly which touch points are having the biggest impact. So if we go on to the next slide, this shows how the study works for each participant. Well, at this point, we're going to have a look and bring in Professor Hugh Wilson, our long-term and highly valued colleague from Warwick Business School, and Tasha Polston, our brilliant team member, to see what they've uncovered. So I think before we go into that, maybe Hugh, you'd just like to make a little bit of an observation on that ad that we've just seen and COP26, because you were there and we'd love to hear what you felt.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess a big takeaway from COP26, I mean, I was there presenting about the role of business in all this, but a big takeaway was, 2030 is the new 2050, where countries are replacing their 2050 targets or complementing them, which are so far away you can kind of ignore them, with stretching 2030 targets. And that's going to cascade down, I think, to companies as well. But the other thing was, if 2030 is the new 2050, as it were, also like sustainability more holistically is the new carbon, because for the first time the international community was cutting deals not just on carbon but on methane. And I guess the easiest way of cutting methane is by having less meat and dairy, and also on forest loss. We've lost 40% of the world's forest already, and so there was a global deal on that. And guess the leading cause of forest loss? It's cattle and soy. And guess where most soy goes? 60–65% goes on chicken feed. So I think there will be a cascading down, I think, from policymakers who'll start taking an interest in nudging people, not necessarily towards veganism, but towards having less meat and dairy in their diet.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for putting what we're going to share today in that framework and that context. So I think at this point, Tasha, would you like to share with us what you've been finding out?
Yeah, we actually have some really interesting insights to share with everyone here today, Fiona, and diving into this has been really thought-provoking from my side too. So actually, as you can see here on this slide, the most impactful touch point is the me consuming/using one, with TV in store and online also really working well to improve category awareness at a total level. In the case of the me consuming/using, we can see that having an experience with this touch point has a 3.52 times impact on increasing category awareness versus someone who hasn't had this experience. TV also does well by improving category awareness 2.41 times the impact of somebody who hasn't had a vegan experience through the television. As you can see from the comment on the side here, for this particular participant, actually witnessing the McDonald's McPlant Burger advert really helped to improve not only their awareness of veganism, but also ensured their interest in this particular product. Moving on to our next slide, and speaking of interest, we can actually see that similarly to improving category awareness, the most impactful touch point in improving category interest is the me consuming / using touch point again. However, with personal conversation and seeing someone else consume or use also doing so well, we can see that these social influence factors coming through here. Hugh, I know you found this to be really interesting. Do we actually know if we see this in any other categories?
Well, certainly one thing we do see in other categories is the importance of these social touch points, not just word of mouth, the personal conversation, we all know that's important, but seeing someone else using, yet again here, it's coming out really important. And we actually saw that when we first started working with Fiona a number of years ago on analysing this real-time experience tracking data. We saw it in soft drinks, you might remember, Fiona. It was the number 3 touch point in terms of influence. It was pretty important, seeing other customers, and we're such social machines, we just copy each other. Someone else has it, so we think, oh, I'll give it a try. And we saw it with electronics products as well, and things like mobile handsets and televisions, where it was second equal touch point. It was second only to in-store touch points, which tend to win out because they're at the nearest to the moment of the purchase decision. And so I think this is something that marketers can act on, not just in vegan, Tasha, but also in other categories. It's no coincidence, for example, that over a 20-year period, that the leading hybrid was Toyota's Prius. Why? Because everyone can see a mile off that it's a hybrid. It wasn't available in that shape in anything other than hybrid. So it is something we can kind of work at.
That's really interesting, Hugh. And we've actually tried to break down the rest of this webinar into 4 key vegan categories that we felt had the most interesting insights to share with everyone. So I think our next slide, or the slide after, is our first category, which is food. Actually, moving on to the next slide, we can see that actually across our sample, an experience with food is working to show that veganism just isn't a trend that is going away anytime soon. In our experience maximizer analysis, an experience that lands below 1 means that this touch point is ensuring that someone is less likely to endorse a statement or a measure. So in this case, people are 0.51 times more likely to say that less likely rather to say that veganism is a trend that is going away sometime soon. So it's definitely sticking around. Furthermore, we can see that an experience with food is proving to ensure that participants are 3.67 times more likely to endorse sustainability as an important reason to be vegan. This can also be seen with the environment and animal welfare as being really important to people choosing to be vegan. This is continued into our next slide, where we can show that food experiences are working to improve the key image statements of animal friendly and innovative. However, I think the most surprising result here is that an experience with food is working well to prove to participants that vegan food is just not as expensive as perhaps they first believed. As this comment demonstrates on the side, participants are actually seeing in store and on shelves cheap vegan products, as well as offers and deals, which is definitely making vegan food more accessible to the general public as it becomes more popular. On our next slide, we can see that for the over 35s, experiences with food are really working best to improve the key image statement of animal welfare as an important reason to be vegan. It also shows that eating healthy and veganism as a trend that isn't going away are also improving. As we can see from the comments here on the side, the idea of animals being treated humanely and well is really important to this demographic for their food experiences. So Hugh, I know this is something you've thought about before. Do you have any thoughts or contributions to this?
Yeah, I mean, looking at these, as it were, moral issues, you know, animal welfare has traditionally been number one of the kind of three big things that on the kind of sustainability side that motivate some people to having less meat and dairy. And the environment's catching up fast, particularly for younger demographics. I see in your data, you know, we've seen elsewhere as well. But I think there's an ordering going on here, which is quite interesting. You know, when we had a really good look at this data, Tasha, because people at the beginning of the week in the pre-surveys, it's very plain, you know, particularly those who have more meat, and particularly the older people, and particularly men. Many of them start off, if you ask them what words they associate with veganism, they say words like boring and expensive. So if you what works is tackling those hedonics first, you know, getting the functionality of the product right. Does it work? And once people are satisfied with that, then they look on the label and they say, oh, and now, you know, now I actually feel good about this because it's also good for animal welfare. And then they can feel proud about that, which motivates them to dig deeper into vegan things thereafter. So that's what we were interested in with your data, that kind of sequencing that goes on, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? From first principles as marketers, you know, we all know get functionality first, get the functionality right. That then gives people permission to feel proud and of doing the right thing and buy more.
I think this is something we discussed last time with the beauty category, that people were really enjoying this idea that they can have a product that they've used for a long time. Oh, and it turns out to be vegan and is helpful to the environment. And actually, the next category experience we'll be discussing is beauty. And as we saw in the last webinar, this category experience map proves that beauty is the most engaging category across the market. However, we can dig a little bit further into the details in this webinar thanks to the Experience Maximizer analysis. So on the next slide, we can see that beauty experiences are working really well to improve several key image statements at a total level. The most significant improvement is for being animal friendly, with a participant 2.96 times more likely to endorse this statement after a beauty experience than if they hadn't have had one. We also can see that environmentally friendly, inclusive, worthy, and ethical are also doing really well. The comments here at the side demonstrate that participants want to be sure that their beauty products are not being tested on animals, as well as ensuring that they go a long way to being environmentally friendly and helping the planet. On our next slide, for the over 35s, we can actually see that the beauty experiences are working to improve sustainability and the environment as important reasons to be vegan. However, and you've probably noticed it, the most surprising output here is that it's improving the notion of eating healthily. I really wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this one. So I've dug into the comments, and in order to understand this and the connection between eating healthily and the beauty market, I actually discovered that the beauty market as a whole and the industry is doing really well to promote the concept of wellness and well-being as a whole. As this participant on the side here actually really does well to explain to us, there is actually a correlating factor between the idea of inner health and outer beauty, and how well-being as a whole is all about that balance, and that veganism can really go a long way to contribute to this. Hugh, I won't drag you into this one. So Fiona, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm clearly insufficiently beautiful.
No, I don't agree with that at all, Hugh. But I can definitely say that I'm in the over 35 demographic. I mean, I think what I loved about this chart is that whole thing about eating healthily. And if you were a beauty manufacturer or retailer or something like that, you might not think of having that as an image statement, because you would be thinking of other aspects. And the fact that it comes out and we can see how that link is made, and that it is, you know, beauty is not skin deep, it is about kind of what you're putting inside you as well. And so I love this just because it was surprising, and anything that's surprising, I think that's where you get the insights from. So I really liked it, Tasha. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
No problem. I thought it was really interesting. And to dive into even further interesting ideas, that our next concept, our next category is actually beverages. I actually just wanted to reiterate the next slide, the category experience map for everyone, just to emphasize that while beauty products are actually proving to be the most engaging at a total level, beverages are really not that far behind, and they've got an incredibly high positivity and persuasiveness. On the next slide, we can actually see that in this case, the consumption of beverages are working particularly well in maintaining awareness of veganism at a very high level. Those that have had a me consuming experience with beverages are 9.31 times more likely to maintain their awareness of veganism than those who haven't had this experience. Indeed, even furthering this, beverages are also working really hard to improve their interest for participants while they are in store. And this is incredible, that as we can see from some of the comments here, that the idea of consuming vegan milk products, for example, doesn't feel like you're making a huge lifestyle change, and that you can continue to enjoy a beverage without actually needing animal products to be in it or a part of that process. Hugh, I know you had some thoughts on this. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, what's particularly interesting to me about beverages is their role in this whole, set of kind of vegan categories as a kind of little bridge, as an easy trial point. Because one of the resistances that you showed in some of your qual analysis you did, Tasha, some of the word clouds you did on some of this data, one of the resistances that many people had in the pre-survey at the beginning of the week was, for some people, veganism was some kind of faddy, woke thing that, some trendy young people have. I'm exaggerating slightly, but not much. And the last thing you want as a marketer is to sort of set up a kind of us and them thing. There was a danger there's a danger of veganism becoming a kind of, that's something that the out group do, and then this goes with a fear someone's going to take away my Saturday bacon if you present it in sort of absolutist terms. So what beverages seem to be doing quite nicely is providing an easy way to say, look, we call this vegan, but it's, you don't have to give up your bacon. You just have a little bit more plant-based stuff through your week. And this is one reason why the term plant-based is doing so nicely, because it doesn't have those social identity connotations of veganism as a cult. So it helps people see veganism as more of a continuum thing. You can be healthier and look after the planet and look after animals if you just have more of this in your diet and less of the other stuff. It helps look at veganism as a continuum rather than a binary yes/no thing. And that's really helpful role that beverages seem to be playing at the moment.
I think another category that's actually really helping this idea of slowly introducing people to the concept of veganism as opposed to having to make a huge lifestyle change is restaurants. On our next slide, we can actually see that at total level, category experiences with restaurants is working really well to improve this key image statement of the idea of being trendy. As you brought up earlier, Hugh, as we can actually see from these comments on the side, the large reason behind this is because veganism in restaurants, or seeing vegan restaurants, appears to be in demand to those who see vegan restaurants or vegan products in restaurants. Is that the idea that these places are busy, they're in demand, they're creating products just for vegans. It all contributes to this idea of being trendy. And on this over 35 slide, we are actually showing that those who have had a restaurant experience are 2.12 times more likely to endorse sustainability as an important reason to be vegan than those who didn't have a restaurant experience. As we can see from these comments here, restaurants adapting their food to be vegan and having meat alternatives make it really easy for consumers to participate in being vegan. And not only that, but making the choice a lot easier too. They really like the idea of this, to use this term here, a sustainable twist, such as the McDonald's McPlant Burger or KFC's vegan corn burger. Hugh, do you have any insights for the restaurant section?
Well, yeah, I was rather struck by these findings on people's association of the brand with sustainability, because to begin with, I wasn't quite sure why you put sustainability as a question in the survey, because it's a word we associate with product brand, with companies, I should say, rather than product brands. It's quite a kind of business term in a way, but what this analysis is showing is quite interesting. It shows the relationship between the product brand and the company brand with some of this stuff, that if you've got some sustainable products, in this case vegan ones, prominent in your portfolio, it can help the parent brand with its sustainability credentials, and clearly to help a company brand to be sustainable. Clearly the most important thing you need to do is walk the talk, put your own house in order, look after all your inputs and outputs and so on. So obviously, you have to be authentic and get it right, and hopefully you're not just doing it to promote your products, but it is helpful to have strong lead product offerings in the portfolio if you're trying to have a reputation, particularly amongst potential employees, actually, and actual employees, of being a responsible company. It does help. But the other thing I thought was interesting is the remarks about it being like trendy and innovative, and making the company have those positive brand associations. That it's, I think about that with us as a business school. We're on a big kind of sustainability push to put our house in order in terms of all sorts of things, our carbon footprints and so on. And we've noticed something similar, that people like that, and we've got a long way to go, but people like the fact we're doing our best, not just for sustainability reasons, but also it makes us look like we're not behind the times.
Yeah, I think this is really important in understanding how people who do like vegan products, but also how to bring in people who are, as we call them, vegan rejectors. We actually just wanted to give everyone a really brief insight into how these vegan rejectors are actually experiencing veganism. And on our next slide, those vegan rejectors we have classified as those who have claimed they would absolutely not consider veganism as a potential lifestyle change. They are not open to the idea of being vegan. However, as you probably all spotted, Beverages are working extremely well as a Trojan horse for vegan rejectors. They are 6.47 times more likely to be interested in veganism and vegan categories as a result of a beverage consumption experience. Furthermore, we can actually continue to see that vegan rejectors endorse the idea of vegan products being animal friendly, restaurants being innovative, and also the food, again, continues to not be as expensive as they first thought. Hugh, I know that you have some thoughts on this. Do you have any key takeaways from us for our overall chat today, or from the vegan rejectors section?
Well, I mean, this emphasizes what we saw earlier. And I mean, anything to do with sustainability, there's a huge attitude behavior gap. Actually, there's a huge attitude behavior gap in most categories, isn't there? So I mean, one moral is don't trust surveys. Surveys are wonderful, but obviously there's all sorts of issues. One of them, which we've spoken about, is this kind of social identity issue. I see my colleague Emma McDonald's on the call. We wrote a Harvard article about the problems of social identity and why, you know, my social identity when I'm filling in a survey may be totally different from my social identity at the moment of my buying something. And that's one reason for the attitude behavior gap. But another, in anything to do with sustainability, there's this problem, you know, the famous problem that, you know, is well known in firms such as Mesh, you know, the whole problem of social desirability bias. People give you the answers they think you want to hear. And that's very true of anything to do with sustainability. So, you know, what comes out loud and clear in your data and your analytics is if you listen to people in real time going about their week and what's influencing them, you get a very different story from if you just look at the survey. And that story broadly says, however much people say, oh, you know, veganism, I hate that lot. If you provide something that looks and tastes great and that is easy to try, then all these other objections melt away. And then once people have had your product and it's melted away in your mouth, and I'm expecting the free samples at this point, Anne, so please pass one down the wire, then you can give people something to be proud of. So then is the moment to start giving something, giving people the messages about, oh, and we're wonderfully nice to our animals, and it's fantastic for the environment, and all that stuff. Once people have tried your product, because, you know, we've done other work, including experimental work, actually showing that, you know, guilt can drive behavior, but pride drives it even better. So we need to create opportunities, however small. We feel guilty enough already. Most people feel guilty enough already. We need to create opportunities where they can also have a little bit of balancing pride in doing the right thing from time to time. And that actually, our evidence suggests, motivates people better, certainly than a continual stream of guilt that can tend to, on the contrary, to make people kind of switch off and give up.
Well, I think there's been some fantastic discussion here, and I'd love anybody to put any questions that they've got in the chat, and we'll have a little quick Q&A. There's a good one that's come in from Leslie Hallam here, so let me read this one out. Given the access to over-the-horizon consumer insights that you have, how is the panel feeling? Optimistic, pessimistic, in despair? Hugh, how are you feeling?
Well, at this moment, I'm feeling surprisingly sunny. You know, that's the benefits of social connection, actually. And, you know, it was, you know, I went through a bit of a pretty low period coming away from COP because, you know, one of the dangers of working in sustainability is, you know, the data is frightening, and you know, the personal stories are frightening as well. I spent some time in Tanzania with herders, and you know, it's, you know, climate change is here, folks. It's affecting people's lives, and I think the place I find hope is actually through taking positive action, however small, and through doing that in company. So but that's probably why I'm feeling good at this moment, because here I am in company with some great colleagues who are looking at the same issues. Thank you, Hugh. Tasha, how about you? What are you feeling?
Yeah, I feel quite optimistic as well. As somebody that actually has quite a lot of allergies, it's quite nice to see that vegan products are actually going out of their way to adapt to people like myself as well, so that to take Hugh's words earlier about constantly feeling guilty about not doing enough, I feel like I can start to do a little bit more. But yeah, I think overall, based on what I've seen from our data, I definitely feel like we're heading into a period where the normal general consumer is more not only socially aware, but really wants to go out of their way to help contribute to help the problem of sustainability and climate change.
Well, thank you both for that. And I have to say, as somebody who is vegan, apart from all the other benefits of sustainability, environmental friendliness, animal friendliness, I'm actually just really grateful that it seems to be okay, that you're not the really weird one that's gone out with everybody else, that actually there might be something on the menu and that you're just somebody like everybody else, and you know, you're not kind of pointed out as being unusual. So I'm grateful for that. We've also got some other questions that are coming in. So this is a great one actually. Does beverage as gateway go beyond the milk substitutes now? Does it include things like beer or hot chocolate? Apparently Brewdog's got a vegan option. Tasha, I don't know how far you've delved into these comments and whether you might know that, or whether that's something we take away and look at.
It's definitely something to look into further, but I can say that the vast majority of our experiences are milk substitutes, but they are not the only ones at all. I know you picked up on the hot chocolate. I think we've, Leslie, you did, thank you for that. We actually spoke about it. I think there was a comment slightly earlier, or it may not be in this deck anymore, but one person actually chose to have a vegan hot chocolate in one of their favorite like takeaway restaurants, and they didn't even know it was vegan, and then they found out after the fact and said, this is one of the best hot chocolates I've had in a long time. So it's definitely something that's being picked up on elsewhere, but for sure something to delve into further.
Brilliant. And I noticed that Verity's commented that to appeal to millennials, Guinness, for instance, has been vegan for a few months now. And again, I think very interesting in terms of how brands might be appealing to different consumer groups through going down this route. Dana, glad to hear that you're optimistic as well, and that I can see your voice coming through, and we're hoping that it's going to come back in reality soon. Vegan ice cream is much nicer than cow's milk. That's an interesting point as well, Verity. So thank you very much for that. Well, talking about food, I think we should now welcome our guests. So thank you very much indeed, Hugh and Tasha. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today, Anne McCormack. She's been at Mondelez for 14 years, and before this she was a strategic planner at agencies like Saatchi's, which I was absolutely delighted to hear about because my background was in advertising planning before setting up Mesh Experience. And actually, Anne, I know some of the people on this call have also come from an agency background. Anne is the Consumer Insight Manager, and she's responsible for the recent launch of the Cadburys Plant Bar. And if nobody's seen that, this is what it looks like. Okay, so a very warm welcome to the Vegan Meshup, Anne. And I think at this point we'll come off the screen share so that we can actually see Anne. I love your background. That is looking really cool, Anne.
Thank you. It's another plug for that as well.
Well, we would love to talk about this launch. Cadburys is obviously a really iconic brand. And what made you decide to launch the Cadburys Plant Bar? Can you tell us about this story and the journey that you've been on?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share this story. And also, I just want to say, so much of what you've already been saying in the presentation ties in with the discoveries that we've been having over the past few years as well. So it's very reassuring. So answering your question, obviously no company can afford to stand still. We constantly, like all big companies, we monitor trends all of the time and try to keep abreast of what people want, what's happening. For years, we've been seeing a slow increase in the interest of lactose-free and vegan foods. And about 10, 15 years ago, we actually launched a lactose-free Philadelphia cream cheese. But it was just ahead of its time, I think. It finally got delisted about 5 years ago. But just this month, the Philadelphia team have launched a plant-based Philly as well. So it's all a matter of timing. And I think this is what we then realized around about 2017, 18, we noticed that the vegan trend really was starting to gather pace. And that's when our research and development colleagues were briefed to create a vegan chocolate. Now, of course, you can buy dark chocolate that's essentially vegan. So if you desperately want chocolate as a vegan, you can get it. But at the time in particular, I think there was only one or two other chocolates that claimed to taste like milk chocolate. So we figured that that was the challenge for us, is can we actually produce a milk chocolate, or sorry, a chocolate that tastes like milk chocolate? So the journey that we went on was quite long and quite complicated. And I just went back through our files and checked what we did. We started off doing a technology evaluation. The research and development team did that, looking at what was available from the ingredients that were available. And they then did a consumer screening of the appeal of those sort of potential ingredients. They then went on from that to narrow down and do a prototype production. And then they went into consumer testing of a few of these prototypes. And they narrowed them down from there again, but we still had several options. And that was where my job came in. The consumer insight, we set up doing some qualitative in-depth research. And my little plug here is the Lucid Research, who did a fabulous job for us. So within that research, we were looking at, well, how do we position this? What's the consumer need and desire? And that tied in, we learned a lot as well about don't talk about guilt. Don't tell people what they're desperately in need of is a chocolate that doesn't have, don't go there at all. So we learned an awful lot in that. But we used that research as well to help us on what do we call it? Obviously, we can't call it Cadbury Dairy Milk. What do we describe it as? The ingredients and what should we actually call them? Almond milk, almond paste, almond drink. And then on top of that, looking at the endorsements we should have from vegan associations. Furthermore, we also looked at the packaging, the shape, the size, the thickness, and the pack design. So what colors should it be? How much purple should be in it, and so on. So once we gathered all of that information, we then passed back to consumer science, gave them all the indications of where it should sit. They then did some further research, narrowed things right down, did some product testing and said, okay, we think we've landed on the one. We then took on doing some pricing research, some basis pricing research to work out exactly what the pricing ought to be. Then we passed back to consumer science again, where they finally tested what was their winning recipe against the competition that was actually on the market at that time. Because by then we had probably another 6 or 7 other competitors who had launched products. So that's the journey that we went on to get us to the point where we were ready to launch.
I mean, it's really a long time with a lot of those different stages, and all credit to you that you were noticing 4 years ago that this was going to happen. You've also touched on something else that I'm fascinated about. So dairy milk, I mean, milk is in the name. So how did you actually decide to handle the whole naming and descriptions around the plant bar?
Well, we did have some fun around that, dairy, not milk, and so on and so on. So firstly, I suppose that Cadbury was the obvious point. I mean, Cadbury is synonymous with Cadbury Dairy Milk, which is a great advantage for us. So what do we call it? If we call it, obviously we're going to call it Cadbury, but what else do we then describe it as? We actually did consider Cadbury Dairy Free, but sort of some of the reasons that you touched on already, that bombed in research because people didn't want us to tell them what wasn't in it. They want this whole thing to be about what it is, be proud of it, and be transparent about it. So whilst we've got some strength in the fact that it was going to be called a Cadbury product, we still had a long way to go to work out, well, how do we describe this? And it was interesting at the time we started this, because we actually did include the description plant bar. And at the time of this research, so we're talking 2019 by then, I think, we really never imagined that we would end up calling this plant bar. Because anything at the time, anything vegan or certainly plant-based, was assumed by most people not to taste that good. And as a result of the research that we did there, because even then we weren't sure whether we were going to use oat as an ingredient or almonds as an ingredient or blending of both of them and so on, we did eventually come out of that research with a clear idea of, okay, we need to reflect what is in the product. Cadbury oat milk chocolate or Cadbury almond milk chocolate. So we made that decision, but typically, as life happens, a few months later, an EU ban came in on the use of the word milk for any non-dairy products. So we couldn't use the word milk, we couldn't say almond milk. We didn't want to do a cheat with the MYLK or M*LK. So we spent another few months trying to work out exactly what we could call this new Cadbury product. And in the meantime, of course, we were still honing down exactly what the product would be, and there was a lot of product testing going on in the background. Then, of course, COVID hit, so we then had to reassess everything as well. But the COVID thing hitting also coincided with the increasing development of vegan food products, and in that time, we had an explosion of plant-based foods coming out everywhere. So at the end of all of that, plus COVID as well, postponing things for us, in the end, we actually opted to call it Cadbury Plant Bar, and that's the story of that.
And I think what you've just articulated is the sheer changing market, which, you know, you're having to operate within, that what you thought at one point was not the same later, and how you're having to be really agile in the way that you're looking at insight and responding to what's happening. So, I mean, I think that's fascinating in terms of, you know, for others that are looking to launch into this market, and how quickly people's perceptions are changing, and what is the right thing to describe products in this area, I think is interesting. And the other thing that we noticed from what Hugh and Tasha were talking about is that consumption moment, which is obviously changing people's perceptions, but it's absolutely paramount. Now, the plant bar tastes pretty amazing, because actually look how much I've got left. I just, you know, it's not identical to Cadbury's dairy milk. So how did you kind of work out how it should taste and what the smell should be and the texture and profile and that kind of thing?
Right. Well, firstly, I have to give the accolade to our R&D people, because they were the ones who really cracked this. We had some big surprises along the way, because we not long before then, we'd launched 30% less sugar. And in that process and development, we had discovered that people were adamant they really wanted it to taste as close as possible to Cadbury dairy milk. So we assumed that that would apply to this as well. We were absolutely convinced that it had to taste exactly like Cadbury dairy milk. So we were very surprised when we actually started doing research and investigating, that people told us, no, we don't want it to taste exactly the same, for a variety of reasons. One, when you're vegan, and remember, a lot of the potential market here weren't pure vegans, they were flexitarians. So on those days, whether it's a Monday or a Friday, where they sort of give in and they actually do have the chocolate that they want, they said to us, we can still have Cadbury dairy milk if we want to. We don't need it to taste the same. And if you're claiming to be vegan, plant-based, whatever you're claiming to be, we want to have some evidence that it really is what it is. So I want to taste a little bit of the nuttiness of the almond or the creaminess of the oat milk. So that was one of the biggest surprises we had, that, actually, this is not supposed to replicate Cadbury dairy milk. It's got to have Cadbury notes to it. That's certainly very true. And going back to what you've been saying all along as well, of course, taste is absolutely paramount. It absolutely had to taste fantastic. So we ended up, and R&D managed to work this out, to give it enough Cadbury notes that people could still say, yes, that's what I expect of Cadbury. It's got the smoothness, the creaminess, the fuller texture. And the fuller texture was very important and very difficult to achieve. But it's also got just a hint of the plant ingredient flavor. So it took a long time, but we got there in the end. And with the various stages of research that we did to make sure it was right, we proved to ourselves that it really was the right thing to do to make it slightly different, but not too different.
I think that what you said is fascinating there about the texture, because I took a bar to yoga the other day, to my yoga friends, and we were all sharing it. And the first thing that somebody said is, "Oh, this texture, it is just like Cadbury's texture." So, you know, it's interesting that you said it took a long time and a lot of work, but the first impression for somebody that hadn't ever tried this, it was the texture that they commented on, which I thought was interesting.
That is fantastic that they picked up on that, because that is the thing that differentiates it.
I'm going to let them know next time I see them that you're pleased.
Tell them I said thanks.
Exactly. So what impact do you think that the launch of Cadbury's Plant Bar is going to have on the parent Cadbury's brand? And what influence do you think it might have on Mondelez and other potential launches in this area?
Well, I suppose the launch of the Plant Bar, it just helps keep Cadbury relevant in today's world and moving forward. We're always very aware that we need to keep abreast of how younger people are seeing us. And we think it's ensuring, because we've actually already seen, even in the short time it's been on the market, that we have succeeded in attracting a lot of younger people with this product. But what it's doing is ensuring that younger people are seeing the good old Cadbury that they grew up with, that it is keeping up with the times. So it's helping to future-proof the brand. And we've learned a lot about, over this process, and our Philadelphia colleagues as well, what we're learning over this time of development is a lot about what consumers are looking for with these kinds of products, and rethinking quite a lot about how they're seeing things, touching on what Hugh mentioned earlier about this getting a positive attitude about the presentation of products, rather than trying to tap into what you could describe as the old-fashioned way of approaching marketing, which is key into an insight, a need, a problem, and give them a solution. It's not so much about that. This is simply saying, you know what you want, and here you are, we're giving it to you. So all of that, I think, just keeps us thinking forward and moving forward with the times.
Yes, and this was also coming through actually in the chat as well, and with people talking about millennials, and you know that it very much felt that that this is something that's attracting, you know, younger audiences into brands and keeping them relevant. Yeah. Well, I think before we finish, I would just like to ask you, what are your top tips that you would give to marketers and insight directors when they're actually considering whether to launch a vegan or plant-based offering?
Well, there are so many. Let's see. I think it's so important, not just from an consumer insight point of view. I mean, obviously, from my point of view, testing conceptually about whether a vegan product works well with your brand, and the brand stretch for it as well. It's a good start point, but the real test lies in gauging how people are reacting to the actual product you end up producing. And how that sits versus your core product. So great first stage, but don't get too excited. Make sure you end up getting the product right, and then pull it all together. But then there are so many other small pointers that aren't just about insights and research. It's about, you know, the marketing guys and the sales guys have really got their work cut out for them. Ingredients that go into these things can be very expensive, so you've got to do your sums very carefully. Longer term, and you know, ask that, as someone else, I think it was Hugh, said, a lot of people tell you what they think you want to hear. So they will tell you, yes, I do want this vegan product, or I will have that because I'm responsible. But in reality, if they see something cheaper, they may not buy it. So you've got to be very careful about what people say and what they do. And other commercial aspects, such as placement in the store. That's absolutely crucial for achieving trial of your product. So talk with the retailers, make sure you're aware of their needs and what they're doing and how they're merchandising things. Can you get a secondary placement, for instance? Do you go in the free-from bit? Or do you go, whereabouts can you sit this product to make sure that its exposure is as high as possible and that you actually get seen? I mean, I could go on with so many other things as well, but we're on our time, so I'll stop there.
Well, I know we could have carried on, I'm sure, much longer, Anne, and you've really opened our eyes, I think, to the insight journey of launching a major kind of brand in this market, and the breadth of the different kind of issues that you need to think about from a marketing perspective, which are going to help the brand to succeed. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed on behalf of the Vegan Mashup, and we're now going to go on to our product of the month, and there's no kind of prizes for guessing what this product is. It is, of course, the Cadburys Plant Bar. Now, just in case anyone needs to know more about this, there are two varieties. There is the original Cadburys Plant Bar, here we go, and then there's also the caramel, and well, it's salted caramel, and this is just divine, and this is the one that I've been eating my way through. My husband knows now that he has to pop them onto the Sainsbury's delivery, and it's obviously in the interest of research. I've been researching throughout January on this product, so I've tried quite a few in the meantime. But I would urge you to go into Sainsbury's and to pick some up and see what you think, because they are fantastic. So finally, I'd just like to thank all of you in terms of attending. I'd like to thank Hugh and Tasha. A special thank you to our guest, Anne. And thank you for joining us all for this second webinar in our Vegan Mashup series, where we were looking at the touch points that made an impact. We do hope that you've enjoyed it. Look out for our next webinar in the series, which will be in April. And here we'll be exploring the impact of gender on attitudes to veganism, as well as welcoming a fabulous senior insight guest from one of the major delivery service companies on what they've been finding out when it comes to our vegan and plant-based habits. So a very big thank you to all of you. If there are questions we haven't answered, we will try and take those away and answer them later. But we really appreciate your energy and support in today's webinar. Thank you very much indeed. See you in April.